Hello there. My name is Juliana. For those who are listening, I need to sort of clarify some things about this audio. It's the fact that I am doing a PhD in sociology, and the content here is pretty much a self note. This is research material for my own dissertation. And what it is pretty much some sort of brainstorming session about the books that I'm reading for my research thesis, right? For my PhD thesis. And today I finished a book. Actually, this was a quick read. It's not a small book, but it was a quick read. Now I explain down the line why. So the book is The Society of Mind by Marvin Minsky. He was the co-founder of the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at MIT, and it's a book from 1985. And the reason why I picked this book is because I'm doing research on distributed cognitive systems. So I thought that the notion of the mind being this sort of society of distributed agents, right? Or distributed mechanisms sounded, just pretty much what it is that I'm trying to depict. The difference here is that his book is strictly speaking about the brain. So the agents are, you know, neurons, or you never make it so clear, but like the smaller parts of the brain that to him does not have intelligence as the brain as a whole would have, right? I'm not going as far as like criticizing or giving some sort of judgment of value for his findings. This is I would say not a traditional book. In his postscript and acknowledgement pages, he does assess this, and he says that, well, this book is not supposed to be seen as scholarly, yeah, scientific scholarship, like not scholarly research. It's more of like this sort of, yeah, inspirational, motivational kind of, yeah, flow of ideas or something. He doesn't use these words necessarily, but is pretty much the idea that he gives. It's like he wants this to be just creative and trigger some sort of thinking about the workings of the brain. But I was super excited about this book at first. The title, The Society of Mind, is just very much like the focus of my thesis. I'm also speaking of the sort of distributed cognitive agents. But of course, I'm more focused on the question of systems, right? So distributed systems, distributed cognitive systems, how agents they work as systems as well. So I'm drawing a lot from the systems theories, complexity theory to explain emergence, right? And how like regulatory processes emerged out of the interactions, cognitive interactions of agents in the system. But I'm particularly interested in human and technical, in the interaction between human and technical agents, right? So how this human machine cognitive interaction constitute and regulate the making of its own, like of of the distributed autonomous system, right? Because of course in complex systems you have these notions of self-organization, self-regulation. So I'm trying to understand what sort of regulatory agents the system, the hybrid system, presents on itself, like poses on itself, right? So thinking of a society of agents, as Marvin Minsky proposes here, is essentially what I am doing, but I'm looking at a hybrid society of both human and technical agents. He doesn't go as far as like putting together the human and technical agents, but through his writing, he does sort of goes back and forth to the workings of the brain itself, and then to the workings of technical artificial intelligence systems, because this is what he was developing at the time. But making these sort of analogies and comparison, those who are in touch with the artificial intelligence and cybernetics theories, we do understand that cybernetics came out of this sort of curiosity about the functioning of the brain, and in thinking of the mechanisms of the brain, gave rise to the understanding of how machines work, particularly how information can travel from, from to and between like different substrates. So his question from the book is like, how can intelligence emerge out of actually emerge from non-intelligence? So here is the first problematics, I think, in his text, because he is considering that like the body, the whole organism, so the intelligence that we observe in the brain emerges from agents in the brain, particularly, neurons, that are not intelligence, that there's no intelligence built into those smaller scale agents. And I think that that's a bit problematic, because he defines intelligence as this sort of problem solving, and then he would question, well, doesn't the brain itself, like, don't neurons solve problems in themselves? Like if you have malfunctioning, the sort of like wrong DNA, RNA transcriptions, they display mistakes, and then certain agents in those mechanisms, they go back and then they fix the problems in the DNA strains. So this is just like the sort of, brainstorming thinking that I would bring to confront the idea that you have scales of intelligence, but that the higher scales of intelligence emerges from from non-intelligence. So how far down the lower levels of these scales of intelligence would you have to go to be able to not find any kind of intelligence? So there are several questions involved here. What is intelligence? What are the different kinds of intelligence? If you have different scales of intelligence, then how can you go about thinking that from one level to the other, you would pretty much disconsider the level of intelligence achieved at the lower level of the society of agents, right? The lower level complexity, I would say. So if he's looking at the brain, and the brain is the larger scale of a mechanism of intelligence, then he would say that the lower scale mechanisms do not have intelligence. So this is problematic, because then in my understanding, in my thesis, if I'm speaking of an even higher level, an intelligence of a higher scale, right, which is the hybrid cognitive systems the largest scale cognitive systems that I'm referring to, if I think that in lower levels of intelligence, in lower levels, the lower scales, you wouldn't find intelligence, then you automatically assume that the brain does not have intelligence. So I think that as intelligence scales up, you get this sort of more complex notion of intelligence. So I think that the question of the definition of intelligence, it has always been problematic, apparently, in the literature, in the discussions, but in this book in particular, it has it intensifies the discussion, because as you go up into the higher scales of intelligence, then you would have to find, or at least come up with, new concepts of intelligence, right? But nonetheless, it's very interesting how he puts together the smaller mechanisms and then the individual agents in this sort of society of agents in this. And he asked, well, how are these agents organized into societies, and how these organizations, how do they work? So you have the society of agents, which is the large scale brain, and the sub levels of the mechanisms of the brain. He calls them like sub society of agents. See, he's really just describing a complex system, right? Where you have the larger system and then you have the lower subsystems. And then he points to how the interaction between these different systems give us the emergence sort of phenomenon that he will refer to as intelligence. Overall, I don't think that the book is super insightful for the purpose of my research. I think it has very good, some good areas, some good points. I skipped most of it, but I do have to sort of go back to the reasoning, to the parts where he speaks about reasoning, parts where he speaks about language. I think it's really important, and somewhat of the connections, how the brain establishes its connections and so on. I flipped through the book very quickly because of his writing style. I did not enjoy his writing style. The way that the book is organized, it makes it very easy to read. But the chapters all of them are just a page long. If anything, two, but I don't think so. I think that they are actually all page longs. But it's not very structured. And then he would just throw things in there. It's like this sort of like abstract idea that doesn't really have any sort of fundament. Like there aren't really like any facts or there's no scientific discipline. Let's put it that way. Which he intended the book to be this way, right? But to me, this was not a point that I enjoyed very much. I wanted to see something more robust and consistent in the sense of like explaining these sort of dynamics, the social dynamics of these agents that he's speaking about. So, but I think that a good thing that I extracted out of this book is like how to analyze these groups of agents and how to understand how they can accomplish things. So he gives like this sort of like step 1, step 2, step 3, that we must know how they are organized, right? And how they communicate to each other, like who communicates with whom, and from that communication, what sort of processes appear, how how they work individually, but then also how the parts interact with each other, or to how the parts or the individual agents interact with all of the agents to which it is connected. So interaction doesn't go only from one agent to another, right? He proposes that we understand the sort of complexities of interaction in one agent connected to several different agents. So this is very much a neural connectivity, right? Because one neuron is connected to several different neurons. So you have like this sort of outbound communication. And this is my wording now. So you have the outbound synapses and how information is transferred from the one neuron that you're observing, from the one agent. And the outbound information reaches several different agents. But then the inbound information, this particular agent will receive information from several different agents. How does that happen? Does it have like temporal scales, temporal patterns, frequencies, and so on? I think so. So he points to the importance of understanding these sort of dynamics, right? And then that we have to understand how the local interactions combine to accomplish what the system as a whole does. So looking at individual agents, the local interaction of individual agents, and then transform that into some level of understanding of the society of agents. So I think that this is pretty insightful. But that was very early on in the book. Very quickly I went through that, and then like everything else was just really just scattered. But the issue is, I think that this book is more useful for those dealing with questions in the discipline of psychology. And this is, of course, 1985. So, it's outdated, of course, in terms of artificial intelligence. It might have been pretty ahead of its time when it was released, or at least pretty insightful when it was released. But I think that for those coming from some kind of background in distributed systems and hybrid cognition or cognitive science, might not find this so amusing. I might be wrong, because I'm not too deep into the cognitive sciences, but to me, looking at distributed cognitive agency as this sort of hybrid social technical functionality, I was quite disappointed with the book. But okay, I got a few insights, so it's okay. So we have to observe the kinds of hierarchies in the networks, right? Yeah, it's all complex systems theories, network and cybernetics all over here. But he brought this to the context of the collective, right? The collective of agents working together for some sort of higher level phenomenon that would be intelligence. So I think that he poses the concept of intelligence as the ability to solve problems. So that comes back to the question of like, which kind of intelligence are we speaking about? What scale of intelligence we're speaking about? And what are those problems? What kind of problems? What would constitute a problem to be solved? I'm not familiar with the literature on the concept of intelligence, but I think that it might be, if I get into this kind of questioning, I would have to get a whole new set of literature reference that I don't have at the moment. So I think this is it, really. Like, I think that essentially for me, what I got from this book was the question of organizations of agents. So how they are organized into societies, and how to observe, right, their interaction, both at the local level, and then trying to understand how that interaction at the local level brings about the sort of emergent phenomenon, right? The learning and intelligence and so on. And I think that the question of scales of intelligence, which comes quite timely, just because a couple of weeks ago, or even maybe just last week, I was looking into the research of Elif Mueller from University of Montreal. Mila, I think, is the laboratory that he's working at right now. He came from the Blue Brain Project. And there's this presentation on YouTube about scales of intelligence. And what he is doing is he's representing neural activity into like, neuromorphic computing, I think, essentially. I have to go back to that YouTube video, but I probably want to link that down in this audio as well. But yeah. So like the brain would be the sort of higher scale of intelligence that they are speaking about, that both Minsky and then Mueller is also speaking about, but he's, programming, neuromorphic computing to represent those. But then my research would come in and sort of integrate that into a larger, even larger level of complexity, which would be the large-scale social technical system. So overall, important book for my research, important book to get through by those studying distributed cognitive systems. Not essential, but it can give some good insights on how to observe cognitive agents, a collection of cognitive agents. And I might come back to this book a few times, but it's I don't think this is like the sort of core literature that I would like it to be. But the notion of the society of agents as the mind, and society of mechanisms as the mind, is very important, and it's central to my research indeed. But that's it.